pass it off to Mandy, our moderator for today's panel. For optimal viewing of all panelists, please select Grid View from your layout options at the top of your screen. Appreciate all of you participating in today's panel, and I will pass it off to Mandy.
Safety Matters webinar. How to set specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals to build a strong food safety culture. I'm Mandy Sedlak. I'm the Senior Food Safety and Public Health Manager with EcoSure, a division of Ecolab, and I'll be moderating our discussion today with a panel of experts in the food service industry. So let me begin with the pleasure of introducing our panel, starting with Corey Reha. Corey is the Executive Director of Quality Assurance for Dine Brands Global, which is the franchisor for Applebee's and IHOP restaurants, and one of the world's largest full-service restaurant companies. In his role, he is responsible for managing the restaurant food safety and brand protection programs, including SOPs, crisis management, and the EcoSure evaluation program, as well as internal product quality monitoring and QA data management. Wow, Corey. Corey has been with the brand as an expert for 29 years and spent his first 13 years in restaurant operations. So welcome, Corey. Lance Stanley is our next panelist. Lance is the Director of Operations, Innovation, and Processes for Panera. He oversees Panera's operating standards, including food safety and COVID operational response. He's been in the restaurant industry for over 20 years. His education, he has a degree in biology, chemistry, and math from High Point University. Prior to his role in the support center at Panera, Lance was an area operating partner for Panera and a regional manager at Applebee's. So together, 49 years of operational experience between you two. So glad to have you on the call. And last but not least, a new member of our food safety and public health leadership team at Ecolab, Natalie Seymour. Natalie is currently a food safety and audit development manager in our Ecolab food retail division, where she supports food safety audits, as well as the Ecolab Science Certified Program and the Food Safety Cultural Assessment Program. Before joining us just this last April, she worked as the Associate Director of Outreach and Teaching in the Department of Agriculture at North Carolina State University. So thank you, Corey, Lance, and Natalie for joining us today. We are here today to discuss how to cultivate a positive and strong food safety culture. In today's environment, we're juggling a lot. I know that you are, I know that we are. And to meet the goal of a positive food safety culture in a world-class organization, we must plan and strategically set smart goals to get there. So before we get into how to do it, I think it's important to define food safety culture. So Lance, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. If you could define or explain food safety culture and what it means to you, your brand Panera, and why it matters.
Absolutely, and thanks, Mandy. Glad to be here. So to me, food safety culture is not, just about health department inspections or an EcoSure audit, but really just the realization of food safety standards through the behaviors of our associates, supported by the decisions and focus of the organization at all times. Are we considering food safety impact when making decisions? Are we trained and knowledgeable to do the right thing? Does everyone know why it's important? Are we connected to the purpose? Is there accountability to do the right thing? A lot of times we make the mistake of communicating a standard, but not the why of the standard, and getting that last level of connection. And the hardest part about creating a food safe culture is that you'll never be perfect and there is no finish line. So most businesses don't like objectives or goals that don't have a chance of being 100% or having an actual end date. But with food safety, it's all it takes is one unfortunate situation to get someone sick, end up in the news, ultimately betray the trust, of our guest, or worse, harm someone seriously, right? So food safety culture is about minimizing that risk being knowledgeable on where you stand, and being actively engaged on continuous improvement. Ultimately, are we keeping our guests and our brand safe? Are we setting our teams up for success to deliver on the expected standards? And having a food safety culture plan is partially about where you are in that journey, but more about being a willing, active, and capable participant in that journey, in my opinion.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And Corey, do you have anything to add to what Lance just said?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me today. And, I almost could just say ditto to what Lance said. Food safety culture to us is the attitude towards the food safety in the organization. It's not just fancy catchphrases, but it's rather the actions and the commitments to a good food safety program and then holding people accountable to the results that it provides. I think a solid food safety culture relies on a strategic, long, drawn out, what Lance was mentioning, and it needs to focus on gradual improvement. It's also how the restaurant team members and managers view food safety. For example, food safety cannot be viewed as a speed bump in an already complex process or something that's going to cost them more money. A good food safety culture has to make them want to and be able to identify food safety risks, make them take them seriously, and then make them want to correct them in the end.
Awesome. I really like that actionable piece, especially since that's what we're talking about today. I want to turn to Natalie to see if you have anything to add to that explanation of food safety culture with your experience and the food safety culture assessment in food retail.
Yeah, thank you so much for including me, and Corey and Lance set this up really, really well with the whys and some of the hows. One of the only things I'll add to this conversation is just the emphasis that food safety culture is not just the burden of responsibility on the person directly handling the food. This is something that needs to be a priority throughout the organization with all partners in your organization, right? So it looks a little bit different to assess food safety culture for where Lance and Corey are, as opposed to where Mandy and you and I are as vendors, as people coming in to support this system. It's not something that it just lies with one group in an organization. It is everybody prioritizing from how we set systems in place, how things are prioritized, how we fund different things, all those kinds of things, which is tricky. But the organization as a whole, regardless of the size as well, like this, what we're going to talk about today is just as applicable to a small business as it is to a larger chain. So
Yeah.
Everyone valuing it.
Yes, yeah, great call out. We're really lucky to have two experts today representing larger brands, but it's also important to recognize that there are brands with smaller structures. And so thank you for adding that important call out. It's important to recognize organizational structure when we talk about goals. So Corey, would you explain how your role fits into the organizational structure and how it relates to food safety? Do we have Corey? Corey, I think you might be on mute. Never gets old. You got it.
Technical difficulty.
Perfect. No, it's great.
Yeah,
Glad
let me
to have you
start.
back.
So for our organization, our QA department, we report directly into the CEO of Dine Brands, and that gives us a little bit of leverage and influence, but also comes with a level of accountability. I regularly partner cross-functionally with both the Applebee's and IHOP operations teams, the culinary team, training, risk management, and communications. Basically, we set the standards, and then these other groups apply it to their functions throughout I think we're about 98% franchised. And then when it comes to actual goal setting, our brand operations teams, they set the goals, but then in QA, we provide them with all the data and the analysis to set those. So when it comes to like the data that you were talking about, so I rely heavily on the data that we get from the EcoSure food safety evaluation results. We call it FSE for our brand. And then we also use the Ecolab Health Department intelligence data, which is the health inspections. So I provide this information to the operations team and make recommendations, and then they use that to define the safety goals that they'll set for the franchisees. So like, for example, I'll use, basic food code guidelines to set a standard like preventing cross-contamination on the grill. So we all know the food code's not specific enough to develop like the how to do something, but it tells us what the end result needs to be or the goal. So I'll take that end result and I'll work with our culinary and operations team to develop the how to do something like designated colored utensils or how to store raw animal proteins on the line properly. And then the training department figures out how to teach it in. And then I'll measure the compliance by analyzing the results that we get on our cross-contamination questions that are on our food safety evaluation or health department inspections. I'll look at this from month to month, cycle to cycle, year over year to see if there's any improvement. If we see good compliance, we know we did our jobs right. If we see low compliance, we'll get the teams back together and work to determine a solution, not just reset the goal. You know, maybe we made it too hard to execute the first time. Maybe the training wasn't adequate. Maybe the physical setup of the kitchen or the tools they use aren't as effective. So we'll use the data and work until we get it right. But without all the constant monitoring of the data and analysis, it's just too much of a challenge to fix.
Yes, thank you. I really like that continuous improvement, that cycle of continuing to improve. And I think that goes back to Lance's point of, Lance, there is no finish line, right? We're continuing to improve and look at our data and take that forward in order to grow stronger and in that food safety culture. So would you also explain how you set the goals? How do you identify and influence those food safety goals that you have within your organization?
So for me or for Lance?
Sorry, Lance. It's for, sorry, Corey, it is for Lance. My apologies.
Yeah, no worries. So a little bit of background on the role and how we make those decisions. So when we say ops innovation, processes, standards, and safety, it's not just because we wanted a really long title. We were just trying to relay out what we do. So as part of this, myself and team, we own our operating standards and then consult with other groups on how to operationalize projects. So that's anything from, you know, how to make a sandwich to what a travel path is, to how do you open or close a cafe, and what are the validations throughout, including food safety processes and results, pest control, chemicals, health department, EcoSure, COVID, et cetera. But we also own innovation projects that help simplify items for our cafe teams. So we consult with other teams on how to operationalize those items and fit them within existing operating standards, and how those projects could potentially impact our existing standards like food safety. When we get into setting food safety goals, you know, I mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as eliminating risk or being 100% when it comes to these operating procedures. And no matter how well you write a process or train it, there's the potential for someone across, you know, thousands of locations to potentially miss something and to not deliver on that standard or expectation. So to help minimize that food safety risk, we look at setting food safety targets that are targeting the items that we're either missing the most often or that are most likely to lead to a foodborne illness to minimize those risks. And then we align on those targets with the entire company. And Natalie touched on this as well, making sure that the entire company is aligned. It's not the sole responsibility of the person handling the product to get there. And then we actively track and work toward those targets. So we use a combination of data, EcoSure results, health department data, and internal data to help set our goals. And then we cross-reference all that data to identify target opportunities. With these opportunities, we identify the why for the opportunity. And if we're missing something, and Corey said this as well earlier, if we're missing something 20, 30% of the time, why are we missing it? And how can we better set our teams up for success? Once we understand the why of that, we set the action in a realistic target. So most have likely heard of SMART goals, we touched on the beginning, but run through what that stands for, you know, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. So I like to use the example of telling an Olympic athlete to run faster or jump higher isn't a real goal, and also doesn't make whoever says it a very good coach. For example, our top food safety violation over the last couple of years has been cold holding temperatures. We dug into the data, identified some of the primary reasons that we were missing. We initially set a 2-year goal where we would increase compliance, decrease missing by X% in year 1, X% in year 2, and then impacting this specific target by a certain percentage over a certain period of time handles the measurable part of that SMART goal, right? And some of the specific, but getting more specific and what makes it achievable, realistic. Why did we think we could move it by X% in year 1 and X% in year 2? So with the why part of it, we identified some specific behaviors that were making it more difficult for operators to achieve hitting those temps. For the sake of time, I'm not going to run you through what our full POA was, but I wanted to share some of the full food safety plan with respect to this and show how we targeted different areas in the organization to make this fall into that SMART format and drive a result. So we identified that not just with temps, we were struggling to improve with our overall top number of criticals, period. We were improving our total critical violations, but we weren't significantly moving the needle on our top 5. So to bring more attention to them, we started by increasing how much our top criticals were worth on our eco-share audits, increasing the criticality of it. We then looked at what are we doing every single day? We updated our daily shift routines and daily validations to include those top food safety violations by area in the cafe to build a habit and make sure that they were truly checking on them as we went. We then created food safety specific validations that our teams could practice, a playbook, if you will, and they could perform it both in long and short forms to target those areas. We reviewed team member training and updated the why to the food safety items that were included. We updated our food safety online page to include transparency to the results and targets so that everyone knew where we stood as we went and how we were progressing. So there was the entire team progressing toward those goals. And then we simplified our temp log process to make it more realistic to complete and updated which items needed to be temped within that log to be items that we missed temps most often. So if we were missing, let's say, sliced tomatoes more often, well, then sliced tomatoes better be on the temp log to make sure that we're checking that one specifically, as an example. We then targeted some structural and procedural items that would positively impact temp compliance that were not directly in team members' control. We targeted equipment replacement, things that were hitting a certain number of years old that we knew would start to struggle, and rather than just repair over and over, started targeting full-on brand new equipment replacement, gasket replacements, force shipments, auto replacements, and streamlining the process to get them. We realized and identified that we were working out of drawers. Equipment is typically designed to hold product at a certain temperature, not to cool it. So we worked with culinary to eliminate SKUs and ingredients that required us to work out of drawers to make it we weren't opening them as often. And it's funny how that works. They work better. We identified that prep was making it to the line before it was cooled. And so we reinvented our prep process, including timing and sequence, to ensure the product was cooled properly before it makes it to the line. And we couldn't implement all these items at once, which is why it's important to be achievable, right? So we looked at when we were going to implement it, wrote out a plan, set out a plan on what would happen each quarter, targeting items that we could reasonably accomplish, and put the project plans in place to get the longer items in play. And then with that information, we felt confident in our percentage improvements year to year was both achievable and realistic. And to hold ourselves to it, we set quarterly food safety culture meetings, presenting to our stakeholders on where we stood and how the items we had implemented to move the needle. I'm proud and happy to say that we far exceeded those targets and many others that we set as we started on our food journey, on our journey toward a food safety culture.
Wow, thank you. I wrote down a few things as you just gave us all those awesome insights. A couple of things that you mentioned, habits. Teams could practice, looking at their habits, looking at getting them while you're training them to practice through, simplifying things. And then you also gave the example of the cold wells, which we have seen a lot. Some will bring, we've seen frontline workers maybe put something into a hot well, thinking that it's going to reheat it, but it's really, hot wells are only to hold products, same with cold wells. So all of those things touch on behaviors within the operations. And Natalie, I'd like to turn to you and ask you the psychology behind food safety culture when we talk about all those buzzwords of habits and behaviors. Now that we have those examples, can we tap into your knowledge of behaviors surrounding the food safety culture program? What's the difference between a traditional food safety program and a behavior-based food safety program? What are the benefits of the behavior-based?
Absolutely. And this is a really fascinating, but I also appreciate frustrating aspect of food safety culture, right? So you can have an amazing system, an amazing plan, but at the end of the day, it is mostly up to a person to execute it, which is why this part of the food industry that we're in with the last step before food is consumed, and a lot of times we have to get really creative. And traditionally, the food safety systems we've worked with are, if I give you the knowledge, you will apply the knowledge. Well, we all have been on this earth long enough to know that that is not how humans work, right? You don't just say, do something, and therefore there is no longer an issue. And so designing systems that work with people and work with your people and work with how your people's brains work is huge. And both Corey and Lance talked about how they're making food safety part of the SOPs and not a separate issue, right? You're building it into the system, building it into the instructions, taking away the pieces that feel like an extra step, because sometimes food safety is presented as do this in addition to everything else you're doing. And really what we're getting at is we want us to be part of what you're doing and not this other thing to keep in mind. And so building it into those systems, taking away pieces that are just making it more cumbersome for someone to do what they're supposed to do, working with how people intend to and then conduct behavior. So we're looking at things like people's attitudes towards it, right? So what Lance was talking about of having that transparency and telling everyone why and what the goal is, that can change your attitude. Because, you know, when we're little kids, we ask, why is the sky blue? Why are bananas yellow? Why all of this, right? I don't think people stop doing that. We're just at some point conditioned to not ask the question anymore. But people still want to have a reason for, why do I have to wash my hands so many times? Or why do I have to cool this after I prepped it? Why can't I just put it into that cold well? So building those pieces into a system, and if I had $1 for every time someone said, well, someone just told me why, that would help, right? So building that in, giving people the tools they need to do the job well. People don't want to do something they think they're going to fail at. They don't want to do something they don't think is important, but they also don't want to do something that feels impossible. So taking out those items that are always hard to get to the right standard, right? So that's why you have cut standards for something coming into your store, your restaurant. That's why what Lance said about putting sliced tomatoes on the log, it's not just make sure everything is cold held, but here's specifically what you need to do, and we're going to set you up for success. So changing the mentality to not just being, if I give this information, then people will know how to apply it, but walking people through, giving them the why of why it's important so that their attitudes might adjust, giving them what they need to succeed, and then making it seem like that is the normal expected thing to do, right? So just like we don't ever fully graduate out of asking why, we also don't graduate out of wanting to do what everyone else around us thinks is important, right? So having that perceived norm and having, for lack of a different term, positive peer pressure of if everyone's washing their hands and they know that it's nasty to leave the restroom and then prepare food without washing their hands, the new person's gonna be like, oh, I should wash my hands. Maybe I didn't before, but I need to do it, everyone else is. And so using the way people work to our advantage and not just creating systems that people have to fit into, but systems that work with our employees, with our associates, will set us up for success in the long run.
Awesome. I love the asking why, and why. I should continue to encourage my family to do that, right? Instead of asking the question why, do you continue to ask me why? So I have a question in the chat that I think it's a perfect time to ask it. It's from Margaret. She asks, do you have any ideas for how to get buy-in and motivation with long-term employees when implementing change? So Corey, can I turn to you and ask you, how do you influence people to build that positive culture?
Yeah, thanks. So, you know, well, first I'm almost gonna copy what Natalie was saying because it makes total sense. So it first starts with influence and credibility, right? I mean, the people who are doing let's say for quality assurance, if we can't influence people properly, but it needs to start with the credibility, you know, so there's a lot of proving why you have to do things. So if people are asking the questions why, you have to have a really good answer as to why you're doing this. Now, whether you're using, you know, an existing outbreak as an example, you go back through history and you look at some of the big outbreaks, so you can say, hey, you know, this can happen. Show them how it can happen in a restaurant. But, you know, in my experience, I've learned that, you know, in some cases, the QA department is not the most popular group in the organization. We're seeing speed bumps that can slow down a process. I can see Lance laughing. He knows what I'm talking about. We're like speed bumps in a process that can lessen the importance of our role and impacts what we do influence. So how I influence people is I partner with them to find a solution to the problem, from start to finish, instead of just pointing out the problems. Like, you did that wrong, you did that wrong, you did that wrong. We'll show them how to do it the right way, show them what the end result is, show them what happens if there is a mistake by using examples. And then for the human aspect of implementation, this is kind of what Natty was saying. We write our food safety standards into the actual operational procedure. It's a way to lessen the complexity of how to do something. So in other words, if a team member has that task to complete, and here's your food safety steps, and here's your how to cook a steak step, if you combine them, and if they ever get rushed, which we all know that team members and managers get rushed, they're more likely not going to miss the food safety steps. If not, they're going to produce an inferior product that hopefully the manager or the expo is going to catch and have them correct it. So I guess you could say we subconsciously influence people that way, but it seems to work.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great example, especially to get buy-in on a positive food safety culture, you have to have a positive reinforcement. It makes sense when you say it. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? How you influence people to build that positive culture, Lance or Natalie?
And that positive culture is ever changing, right? So the change part of it, we had someone in our organization that said something that always stuck with me. And they said that the only person that likes change is a wet baby. And so getting people through that is you have to connect them to really what's in it for them and the benefit, right? Because they know the way to do it. They're confident in the way they're doing it. And if you're trying to influence and implement change, you really need to explain why. Telling someone to do something isn't enough. You have to really influence that change. So something structurally that I'm really proud of in our organization, that within our L&D department, we have an L&C department. And that is a learning and change. So within that learning and change, they're actually assigned to projects, food safety and beyond, and help connect people to that and help actually shorten that change curve. There's always a change curve. You can roll out something that's going to be $1 million at the end of every day if you do this and be like, you know what, but it's different. So there's different levels of incentives. And when there's not $1 million at the end of it, how do you shorten that change curve? And we actually partner with them and utilize the people that are experts in their business to help drive and implement that change in a positive, quicker, and more efficient way. And so that's something just, I know, again, all structures and organizations are a little bit different, but I find that highly effective because the results are all a culmination of the behaviors that happen in a cafe. And if we influence and change those behaviors effectively, then we can influence the result.
And I gotta add to that you're absolutely right. No one enjoys change, and having a why helps ease that change on, right? And valuing the individual and not just giving them a why of, you need to wash your hands so that you don't end up spreading X pathogen onto Y food, but hey, you are an important part of us meeting our goal of protecting the public and serving them safe food. So giving a why, not just here is exactly the behavior and what could happen if it goes wrong, which is valuable, absolutely, right? Case studies and stories, people remember things better when there's some sort of emotion attached to it. And so grossing them out, or unfortunately, sometimes we have to make them sad, right? But bestowing on them the dignity that their role holds, right? Unfortunately, sometimes people think, oh, it doesn't really matter, I'm just a whatever. They're not just a sandwich maker. They are the person who is going to feed somebody and protect their health and protect the health of the person they're doing that. And so sometimes even a little bit of a language shift to say, your role is important. Your role is important to us as an organization. And what you do matters to our collective success and to helping this other person that you probably will never see, but could be drastically impacted by your choice. Using stories that way, I've seen entire classes shift they sit up a little taller and they hold their heads a little higher when you say, it is you who is choosing to protect this child or this person who's eating this food that you prepared. And so sometimes even just that little bit of a language change can kind of ease the impact of the change, but then also going and you're not just changing, here is your protocol, but you're changing, and here is the mindset, and we know that you can do this to help us succeed. So those things are also important to keep in mind.
Oh, thank you. Making it personal. Yes, yes. I hope Margaret doesn't mind, but I'm going to add on to her question. We talked a little bit about influencing the frontline workers and everyone who's there. How do we influence and get buy-in at all levels? Corey, can we start with you and ask how you're doing that?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying, right? You have to build some credibility within, I'll just say the QA department as a whole, right? Now, normally when it comes to, let's say, leadership over management, they're going to be more aware of, what it takes to protect the brand because they're just more, they're more equipped to see that versus, let's say, somebody who's working on the lines who doesn't read about, everything that's happened now or happens in the past. And I don't want to say we use, like, I would use a scare tactic, but you can pretty much break down every major foodborne illness outbreak, whether it be contaminated products coming into a restaurant, a sick team member, or, just bad food handling skills. And you can compare that to, like, I can compare it, I can pull up health department results from the Eagle Eye website, and I can say, hey, look, this is one of our top violations, and this is the same issue that caused a major outbreak at this chain, either recently or last. And that seems to work. What doesn't work is when you just tell people, oh, you have to do it because it's food safety. You have to do it because it's food safety. Call it a shock and awe kind of thing. But if they don't put those two things together, like, the cooks are doing this right now, and we're lucky that it's not doing anything. And like Lance said, we can't expect perfection in the restaurant. All it takes is one person to come into the restaurant sick, or one person to undercook, a raw animal protein. But if you can show, through the data that we collect through, whether it be EcoSure or evaluations, and show that to leadership and say, hey, this is what's happening and this is what causes problems, they tend to listen more often than not. I'll use an example. Natalie had mentioned the thing about, when you're training to, don't want to make people sad or scare them. I know this sounds silly, but when I used to teach food safety classes, like Serve Safe or food handler cards in the restaurant, and cooks leaving the cook's line and going back to the walk-in cooler. They got their gloves on, they open the cooler door, they grab some stock, they come up to the cook's line. And I'm like, you got to wash your hands. You're like, well, why? I didn't touch anything. It's like, okay. So I take them back to the walk-in cooler, and I'll have like a piece of deli meat, like a piece of ham. And I'll take that piece of ham and I'll wipe it on the inside of the handle of the walk-in cooler. I say, would you eat that? And they say, no, I'm not going to eat that. I go, so what makes it okay for you to go back and make someone's sandwich or salad with those same gloved hands? And they go, oh, I get it. I get it. So sometimes you have to break it down real basic or high level, depending on who you talk to get your point across.
Yeah, I really like that example. I might try that when I'm in a restaurant. But yeah, if you don't tell people why, there is no arguing science. So those top risk factors in foodborne illness, right? There's no denying that those have a history of making people sick. But I guess it's when you know the consequences of what can happen that you truly take it in as personal, you believe it, and you want to make a change because you believe it, and you want to do it not just because someone's telling you to do it. And sometimes we do put that on the front line, right? We talk about those that are directly facing our guests, but it's important also for everyone to know what we are working on and I guess dealing with in that sense. Right now, our environment, we have some high turnover. We have some people that are covering different shifts, more shifts as we work through that labor challenge. And I think that that's even more important than ever to make sure that across the entire system, knows that we are trying to educate new people that are coming into our businesses about food safety. And it's really difficult to do at times, to get them to believe. So I appreciate those examples. Natalie or Lance, do you have anything to add to getting this buy-in across the board, especially at the C level?
Yeah, I'm glad to add a couple of things there. But it's really what he said, right? It's about connecting to the why for them and what matters to each department. But when you truly have gotten to a point where you have that food safety culture across the system, nothing makes me happier than not being in a meeting about something that has what they thought was nothing to do with me or my department. And then hearing back after, hey, this project that's 18 months out may have a food safety implication, wanted to make sure you were in the loop. And when you have that level of culture, you've connected people to the why. You have it ingrained. Like we talk about training and education and habit and repetition with team members and connecting them to the purpose, but the why has to matter everywhere. But everyone's why is different. Why I'm doing something or why I'm making that decision at the executive level is different by department, right? There's not usually a proven ROI in a lot of those things. So connecting to the, all right, here's what it means, here's what a potential sales impact could be. And then also, different people or groups are competitive. Hey, here's what others are doing and here's what we need to do to keep up or lead, right? And one of the things I really care and am proud of about being at Panera is that we care about being an industry leader. So we have a department called innovation. And so getting people in line with, hey, this is something really neat and cool that's going to make the job easier overall. And another thing is when you have everyone aligned on trying to make it easier for the people that are actually doing the job, no matter what the task is that you're talking about, you can move mountains. Because if you were constantly rolling out simplification things that make it easier. I saw a couple of questions in the chat about current shortage and high turnover, and it's a truly unprecedented time right now for everyone on this call, I'm sure. And if not, please call me afterwards and tell me how you are just, completely full of properly trained, fully tenured, amazing people and have no turnover. Well, we can chat on that afterwards, right? But that makes it even more critical to have that system and process in place to onboard, train, and make it easy for them and make it a place that they want to work. And food safety is not a separate thing that you do, it's part of what you do. And if you're having to implement or do it as something different on any level of the organization, then we're missing the why somewhere. And the challenge is to find out where and work on that why there.
Thank you. Thank you. Natalie, I have a question for you that came up through the chat. It's about peer pressure. Since it's on behaviors, I thought maybe you would want to take a shot at it. How can peer pressure play into food safety? I know you mentioned that one example, but you might want to expand on it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're looking at, and if you all want to later on, go and Google this, the expanded behavior model, right? So we're looking at what pieces feed into whether or not someone intends to even do something, right? So you have to have your attitude, you have to have some self-efficacy, and then perceived norm. And so that is, what are people telling me should and shouldn't be done? And then what am I seeing being done or not being done, right? Because we want to fit in. And that is a general human baseline thing, right? And so peer pressure comes in of like, hey, at this store, at this cafe, at this restaurant, we always take the time to wash our hands. Oh, there's even something small as like, oh, there's a hook at the door of the kitchen to put your apron on when you go use the restroom. There's these things that are built into the whole system, so the system being built with people in mind, that kind of give everyone these cues of this is what we do, right? And so the more tenured employees are going to be seen washing their hands. They're going to be seen changing their gloves. They're going to be seen going to wash their hands after they sneeze. They're going to tell the team, hey, I'm sick and I'm staying home today, right? So all those are cues, and it's not peer pressure in the sense like what we're thinking about with movies set in high school where, everyone decides that they feel like they need a certain shirt or whatever. It is, here is what I'm seeing everyone else around me do, and I should also do the same, right? And I'll give you a slightly different example from a corporate perspective. When I started at Ecolab, I found out that everyone just puts meetings on your calendar instead of sending an email asking when everyone can meet, right? Which was the culture of my previous workplace. And so very quickly I was like, oh, I don't email to ask, do you do this? I just do it, right? And then we adjust later. And so that is a corporate example, but a lot of us are at the corporate level. So you can see that wasn't a direct, hey, Natalie, this is what I expect you to do. I picked up that cue from other people. So the same thing is going to happen in a home environment, in a small business, in a chain restaurant, in a cafe, in a grocery store. What you do when you walk into that space, as dictated by everyone else, is going to clue you in on how you're supposed to navigate that workplace, right? And then some of that perceived norm or peer pressure, as Lance and Corey have mentioned, can be just built into the SOPs, right? So as you're going down your recipe card, it says cook for X amount of minutes, take temperature. Okay, cool. That is built in. I'm now expected, because if I'm expected to follow the recipe, I'm expected to do all the steps. So that kind of thing.
Thank you. I'm looking through, I was intently listening, so I'm looking through some of the questions on the side. Before we, and now you did touch on shortage and high turnover and employees, short on employees. Lance, I think we all recognize that that's big today, and I think that that's more important than ever, those SMART goals that are, you know, simplified, as you said. You said they have to be, you have a lot of data to go back and look at that. And then I think right now we're using our voice across the system to not only talk to those that are in the restaurant with our guests, our communities, but also at the C-level. I think of the example right now of Food Safety Month, right? It's Food Safety Education Month. It's an awesome time for you to say, hey, that's my jam, right? That's where I am. I love food safety and I need to communicate some things out to the rest of the team. Use that as a tool to say, you know, I would like to talk about that and get that across the board. So I think right now using some of those best practices, see what you see, and Lance, you said it, talking to your peers. I mean, you opened it up for people to call you after this, but gaining insights from other people and networking and talking to your peers about what are those best practices? What are you doing here? What are you doing there? And how can I take that in? But that's a great question, and one that I think will continue to go on and on as we work together to help and try solve that, because that's something that we all want to work together and solve. We are drawing a little close on time, so I do want to give you the opportunity if you have anything else to add when we talk about, you've defined food safety culture, you've given some examples of how it works within your own brands, and Natalie, within the program that you have, data that you use. Is there one thing out of all of that, one or two, I'm not going to limit you to one or two, please give as many as you want, that you want the people here today that are listening to take away with them when they go back and they turn around right now? What's actionable right now that we can turn around and start doing today? Lance, do you want to kick us off?
You know, I was thinking a little bit more about the, you know, current shortage or high turnover environment in all industries. And then you brought up something about Food Safety Month. And I think that something that's important about Food Safety Month is that it's every month. So with Food Safety Month being this month, I think this is really a time to celebrate and recognize. And I think everyone in the industry needs a hypothetical hug right now, right? They're working hard, they're doing a lot, and something that we're doing on our end is with Food Safety Month. With every month being Food Safety Month, we are taking this time to celebrate those that have done a great job with food safety and making that our goal every single day. So instead of having a, hey, make sure you're washing your hands, or make sure that you're temping product, or make sure you're doing something else, even though I know you're stretched really thin right now, instead of it being about adding something else, taking the opportunity to celebrate and inspire and connect them back to, hey, you've been doing this all year, and you've been doing food safety all year. Thank you for what you've done. And popping in, we actually proud to announce we're doing like a daily drawing for team members that were in cafes that scored really well on our EcoSure audits, and taking that opportunity to pop in, do a quick Teams meeting, and surprise them with a bonus for team members in those environments. So think outside the box and to think, all right, I'm trying to get them to do these things, but take a step back and realize for everyone that did not do something, there's a ton that did. And a lot of times we look at this from a compliance perspective. And even if you miss something 20% of the time, you did it 80% of the time. And let's celebrate the times that we did. And when you celebrate the times that you did, you'll find that more people do it more often. And so take that opportunity, spread some love, share some celebrations, and you'll be amazed at how much benefit you get out of that and how much compliance you get out of talking about what you did instead of what you did.
That's an awesome idea. I
Amen
love
to
that.
that.
Corey, I think you're going to add.
Well,
Did you have
so if I had some like final thoughts, it's, I talk about it's setting the expectations, right? Like whether it be setting the goals or you're setting the standards. I mean, to me, they're both the same. It's no secret that the ultimate goal is to keep guests safe and, protect the brands. But there are obvious lines that need to be drawn in the sand when it comes to achieving those goals with food safety. But there has to be a level of realistic expectations on those standards and goals. And you have to do it based on risk assessment and not just picking, an arbitrary number or percentage to say something like, we're going to decrease our top 5 criticals by 10% this year. Because yeah, you may decrease those 10, but then what happens? The ones that are below it, those ones are just going to move up to the top, and it's just going to be this constant fight or uphill battle. So you have to make those things realistic. And then, because if they're not, I guess if the expectations are not achievable, and that's what your food culture heavily relies on, it's just going to frustrate team members and managers because they know that they're not going to be able to succeed. They just give up in the first place. So you're already starting, at a disadvantage. And the other thing too is, I don't know how to phrase this, but a food safety program shouldn't be 100% punitive. To what Lance was saying, we're all really good about saying, you're bad, you did that wrong, and you have to reward the people who do it right. But if your food safety program is too punitive or too hard to succeed, you're just starting everybody off at a disadvantage. It's kind of like that old saying, I think it had something to do with Mutiny on the Bounty. The beatings will continue until morale increases. It's kind of the same thing. If you're constantly hitting people over the head because of food safety and you're not giving them a chance to succeed, maybe those small gradual improvements, you're just never going to be successful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think I remember that sign somewhere.
It's a very popular meme, but I think it was Captain Bligh and the Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yes, it's easy to remember. So thank you. That's a great memory to think about as you were talking about positive cultures. You have to have positive things to say. You can't get there without being positive. You can't be positive without, or get to positive without being positive. So I appreciate that. Natalie, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah.
One last thing or 10 last things you want people to take away?
I just want to reiterate, because both Lance and Corey had really excellent points of the positive reinforcement is crucial to the system working, right? If we had a system of robots, then they wouldn't need positive reinforcement, but we're humans, so we need that. And what Corey said of the ultimate goal is to serve safe food, right? So how we get there is different, but keeping that ultimate goal in front of us as much as we can, we have a really tricky job, and that if we do our jobs well, nothing happens, right? That is very hard to communicate, that if we're doing what we're supposed to do, nothing bad happens. That's also hard to prove, but keeping that ultimate goal in mind. And one of the things that Corey said at the very beginning was being willing to look at your data. And I would encourage everyone to, as scary as it can be, ask the hard questions and figure out where you are, because you can't improve until you know where you're standing currently, right? And that is difficult. And Ecolab and EcoSure, we're ready and willing to help you ask those hard questions. You have other partners that you're working with that will help you ask those hard questions, but being willing to see where you're standing can give you a better idea of where you can go next. And so keeping that ultimate goal in mind, being willing to ask those questions, and then being willing to engineer your systems around the people who are executing them. That is a huge part of making a positive food safety culture. Again, we aren't having businesses run by robots. I know someone asked in the chat, do you see that happening? There's so much attached to food that is more than just the meal itself that I don't think people are ever going to be engineered out of the system. So we just have to work with how people work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I missed that question in the chat, but
Hey, Mandy.
yeah.
Man, there's a question, if there's time, there's a question in the chat that I probably could provide a little bit of information on. I think it was from, I'm trying to find it, it was from Patricia Ross. She asked, can you offer advice for QA structures that report into different departments, for example, like merchandising or ops that are pushed for sales? It is constant influence in telling why scenario for many of us. So our QA department used to report into the purchasing department, which is like, you know, their big thing is save money, buy the cheap products, so on and so forth. I've also reported into the legal department before we rolled up into the CEO. But the purchasing department was a challenge. So I can understand where this question is coming from. I used the exact same philosophy that I talked about, you know, using examples, but instead of telling somebody, hey, you're going to cause someone to get sick because the cook, you know, didn't wash their hands properly, or the server, whatever they did. You can go online and you can look at some of these major outbreaks and you can see how much money it costs a restaurant. You can look at, you know, the sales drop. You know, some restaurants will have a 20% decrease in sales within days. And then you can actually go out and look and say, okay, within a 10, 15, 20 mile radius, those restaurants dropped off in sales. If it's product related, you can look and see, okay, how much product was recalled and what did that cost the system for the people who had to throw things away? So you just kind of have to know your audience and whatever motivates them. If it's not the actual food safety that motivates them, and if it's money, then throw the money in their face and say, hey, this is what could happen. And it seemed to work for us.
Thank you. Those are great insights. I appreciate you looking through the chat and helping me out there during that question. So I want to thank you all so much. I know we're at time. Corey, awesome insights. I know you have a ton of expertise, a ton of time in the industry, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Lance, same, thank you. Your 20 plus years of experience working in operations and now in the corporate office. We really appreciate your time here today. Natalie, we are so lucky to have you at Ecolab. Thank you for joining us as well. We know all of your time is valuable, so we appreciate taking it out today and spending time with us. To everybody listening in today, thank you as well. We hope you took away some nuggets from this, and if you want to rewatch it, it will be recorded. You can, it will be recorded after it's recorded, but it will be available sometime after this, maybe in a couple days. You can find it at ecolab.com/food safety webinars, and that also has past webinars that we have had. I also want to encourage you to continue to participate in Food Safety Month. As Lance said, every month is Food Safety Month. This one has actually declared it. So please continue to take part in webinars and talking to everyone positively about food safety to make a change. And we know that you do every day make a change in what you do. Ecolab is also participating in another webinar at the end of the month. The date is September 30th. It's with the National Restaurant Association, the Vice President of Food Safety, Patrick Guzzle, and I will be joining him on that panel when we talk about creating and implementing a cleaning program, why it's important, and how do you create it. So if you have time on that day, please join us for that as well, so for some more insights on everyday operations. So again, thank you, you three. We appreciate it so much. And to everybody out there, we hope you have a great day and stay safe. Thank you.